In May and June of 1979, the 21 members of the award-winning TCU Jazz Ensemble toured the Soviet Union and Poland. The ensemble, led by director Kurt Wilson, traveled by train, by bus, by streetcar, on foot, and even by boat. After a brief stop in New York and the inevitable loading and unloading of musical instruments and personal luggage, we were off on Polish Airlines. An 8-hour delay in Warsaw, a short flight to Moscow, a day of rest, and the tour began with an overnight train trip to Kharkov in the Soviet Ukraine. Because no one in the Soviet Union or Poland is allowed to take pictures in airports or train stations, our record of the trip is incomplete at times. In Kharkov, we were met by university students, guides, and other representatives, many of whom had never met an American. Their curiosity was as great as ours. After checking in at the Hotel Kharkov, we began the first of many tours we were to take in all the cities and towns we were to visit. Perhaps the most imposing was the Memorial to Eternal Glory, dedicated to the 22 million Soviet citizens who died during the Nazi occupation in World War II. In the winter, we were told, the red lights which line the sidewalk appear to be drops of blood in the snow, and the beating heart can be heard while the music plays continually in the background as the woman waits for her sons, husbands, and brothers who never return. Then it was back to the bus and a brief stop for a look at a park with a miniature train. That evening, the first concert. The hall was called the House of Culture, one of the many throughout the Soviet Union, and it seated about 700. The audience applauded enthusiastically as the first number, Duke Ellington's Take the A Train, ended. They warmed up even more as the ensemble continued with Body and Soul, Fantasy, and The Wind Machine. But it was after the Mancini medley that we first heard the Eastern European custom of rhythmic clapping in unison. Clapping that meant the audience wanted the music repeated. This was to happen at every concert, especially after tunes such as Khachaturian's Saber Dance and the medley of big band tunes of the 30s and 40s. Our guide and translator, Tanya, who became a well-loved part of our group during our stay in the Soviet Union, had a bit of trouble translating some of the names of some of the numbers for the audience, especially such tunes as My Baby Digs Mustard Pie. And then the first concert was over. The next day, we toured a turbine factory and a pioneer club for children, catching the train for Kiev that day. There was lots of talk and a few parties on the train that night. Everyone was wondering if the other cities we were to visit could top our memorable time in Kharkov. The weather was sunny and mild when we arrived in Kiev. Again, we were welcomed by guides and representatives from the Komsomol, the Young Communist League, who presented us with the usual beautiful flowers. This time, we were also greeted by millions of gnats, which were to plague us during most of our stay in Kiev. Kiev, a city of about 2 million, is the capital of the Ukraine. There we stayed in the Hotel Mir, which means peace or world. Although it was one of the newer hotels in Kiev, we learned that we were to get more exercise than we expected. The elevators, not the passengers, decided when they would work or skip floors or decide they were overloaded. So the group walked as much as it rode. Our meals were, for the most part, excellent, if different from what we were used to. Cucumbers, beef stew, chopped veal, white hot dogs, hard-boiled eggs, sausage, sauerkraut, liver, cabbage soup, even strawberry soup, and the ever-present bottled mineral water. But we did have one item that tasted like home, Pepsi. One of the most delightful tours we took was to a preschool daycare center where, following the tour of the building, we were entertained with children's songs and simple folk dances. our trips through Kiev, we passed the famous 11th century Cathedral of St. Sophia and its gold-colored onion domes. Then on to the Dnieper River for a ride on one of the hydrofoil boats. And in typical tourist fashion, we saw Kiev, watched hundreds of people on the beaches, and talked mostly in sign language to other people on the boat. That night, the Kiev concert. Again, approximately 700 jammed into the auditorium, even though the concert had not been advertised. And again, the jazz ensemble was greeted with the rhythmic clapping of a wildly appreciative audience. Another tour, this time a secondary school. It was a holiday, but the teachers and children were there anyway. A few short days in Kiev, we also visited the Golden Gate of Kiev, an architectural museum, saw Swan Lake at the ballet, and attended a party given by the Young Communist League. Russian trains always seemed to leave on time. We were again on a train on our way back to Moscow. The overnight ride included tea from the samovar, watching scenery, card playing, sleeping, and the offer by a woman selling food on the train to buy a pair of blue jeans for 100 rubles, or $130. There were to be 2 days of sightseeing and one concert in Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. After our arrival and transfer to the hotel, we ate our breakfast of liver pate, rolls, jam, hard-boiled eggs, and tea, and began our tour of Moscow. It was a beautiful day as we walked in a park near the Kremlin, watching the other tourists and trying to make some sense of the many plaques and signs we saw. Red Square is probably the most easily recognized place in the Soviet Union. Surrounding Red Square are the Kremlin, the former home of the Tsars and now the seat of government, the block-long GUM department store, and St. Basil's Cathedral. The 500-year-old Annunciation Cathedral, which is part of the Kremlin, was a private church for the royal family and is where such men as Ivan the Terrible is buried. Also buried nearby in his own private tomb is the father of the USSR, Lenin. On another cobblestone square, we saw the Tsar's cannon, which was built in 1596, but never fired since they couldn't find someone to load the 2,200-pound cannonballs. Once again, it was time to eat. This time, sardines, cabbage potato soup, sauerkraut, potatoes, and ice cream. And then it was time to get ready for the concert that evening. Everyone expected Moscow's concert hall to be the best, but it was smaller and less imposing than those in Kharkov and the audience in Moscow seemed more subdued than previous audiences, at least at first. Then, once again, the rhythmic clapping in unison began, and the audience responded to the Wind Machine, Body and Soul, Autumn Leaves, Tuning Up, Saber Dance, and the Big Band medley. It was during the second half of the program that a section of the audience started whistling and stomping, something Russian audiences do to show their disapproval. It turned out that a tour group from Holland had been invited to the concert, and their way to show appreciation was by whistling and stomping. We wondered what the Russians thought about that. By 10 o'clock, the concert was over. We held a farewell party for our Soviet guide, Tanya. The next day, we were free to shop and sightsee and say goodbye to the Soviet Union. Our tour of the Soviet Union was over. The next stop, Warsaw, Poland. Even though we had been in Warsaw only 9 days before, we'd not been able to leave the airport terminal since we were in transit and had only one entry visa. And And there we were in Poland. From now on, nothing was to be on time but our arrival. We met our Polish guide, Michael, showed our passports, stacked the luggage and equipment, moved it several times, packed the bus and truck, and went to our hotel. A French-built 4-star hotel with beautiful rooms and elevators that always seemed to work. Our first Polish concert was to be in Wrocław, spelled W-R-O-C-L-A-W. And in the morning, we headed there on the bus that was to be our almost home for the next 10 days. While our group was in Wrocław, the first of the Polish jazz celebrations began in the Pałastik, or Palace. Various rhythm, brass, and reed clinics were held to acquaint the Polish jazz musicians with how the TCU Jazz Ensemble presented its music. A concert at the Palace one night was followed by a concert the next evening at the Catacombs, a place so small and dark and dank that no pictures could be taken, even though the audience was more than appreciative. For the next 3 days, the group played music and played like tourists, learning that Wrocław is the capital of Lower Silesia on the Odra River and has a population of more than 500,000. Founded more than 1,000 years ago, the city has been ruled by Austria, the Mongols, Prussia, France, and by the Germans. It was near Wrocław that we were approached to change money. It seems that everyone in Poland wants dollars or other hard currency. This black market operation is widespread and, although illegal, seems to help the Polish people buy things they would otherwise be unable to purchase. One concert, scheduled for an afternoon in the old part of Wrocław, couldn't be held because the truck with the instruments had disappeared. Luckily, the truck was found in time for a concert scheduled that evening on Polish television. But our bus driver then became lost, and what should have been a 10-minute ride took half an hour. But we did arrive in time to appear on Polish television. And in the Russian fashion, the Poles also clapped in unison, to the tune of 90 degrees Celsius, Fly Me to the Moon, Tuning Up, Days of Wine and Roses, Body and Soul, Saber Dance, and Rhapsody in Blue Disco. The TCU Jazz Ensemble's trip was sponsored by Friendship Ambassadors. Their representative told the Polish TV audience, "We have been honored to have groups coming into your wonderful country in the fashion that you have seen tonight. We have only one thing in mind to do in Friendship Ambassadors, and that is to promote international understanding through the performing arts. We leave you with 2 words, peace and love." And then it was time to leave again, this time for Poznan, driving through the beautiful green countryside with pine and birch forests to our Holiday Inn-type motel. We might as well have been back in the United States. Perhaps the best of all the city guides we met was Barbara. She introduced us to Poznan, a city which had its beginnings back in the 10th century. And to chimney sweeps. And people standing in line to buy something, anything. And that night, another concert, beautifully received, but not enough light to take pictures. The following day began with a breakfast of pressed meat, cheese, bread, butter, jam, and coffee, and the inevitable tour. This time to the castle of Cornick, a 500-year-old fortress built on an island. The castle was almost burned down by the Germans during World War II, but an enterprising servant told the Nazis that the inlaid design in the wood floor was a swastika. They believed him, and the building was not harmed. The castle is surrounded by pathways through beautiful wooded areas and ancient live oak trees which are supposed to be more than 800 years old. Perhaps the most beautiful of the concert halls we played in was in downtown Poznan, a place that at least one member of the group will never forget. What had started out to be the photographing of a cathedral turned out to be the taking of pictures of a military installation next to it. A Polish soldier then confiscated the film and detained the would-be picture taker for a short time, at least until an interpreter could remedy the situation. But the concert hall, with its gilded walls and massive pipe organ, changed the mood. And the audience responded with enthusiasm and spirit to the music. The audience applauded to the sounds of Take the A Train, 90 degrees Celsius, Fly Me to the Moon, Donna Dance, Evergreen, the Mancini Medley, Tuning Up, Body and Soul, Copacabana, Ooglies, Sabre Dance, Salute to the Big Bands, and encores of Rhapsody in Blue Disco and Facts About Sax. That night, an American girl, Rachel Gould, who happened to be in Poznan, sang with the ensemble. Back on the bus for the return trip to Warsaw, but before the final concert and tour of Warsaw, we had a farewell dinner. It may be impossible to take pictures by candlelight, but the mood could be gleaned even without light. Our final tour, the city of Warsaw. Almost everyone had a cold or some other kind of debilitation, but we were still on our feet. Warsaw was founded in the 13th century and today has a population of more than 1.5 million. By the end of World War II, little was left of Warsaw. Hitler had ordered its complete destruction. The old part of Warsaw was rebuilt after the war to look just as if nothing had happened. Our city guide regaled us with stories he said were the only true ones. He told us, for instance, that Poles like to stand in lines, because if there's a line, there must be something interesting. Our director, Kurt Wilson, even tried his hand at directing a certain type of Polish music. And, of course, no visit to Poland would be complete without a visit to the park and statue dedicated to the most famous of all Polish musicians, Frédéric Chopin. Our final concert was in a student club next to the university. By that time, the group had become very adept at loading and unloading our truck. This audience, which had been listening to disco, was slow to respond, but by the time we'd played just a few numbers, they wouldn't let us stop, and for the last time, we heard the rhythmic clapping in unison. Our last day in Poland was sunny and hot, even at 6 in the morning, as we prepared for the final leg of our fantastic journey. So we loaded our bus for the trip to the airport. After an hour's wait, we boarded the Polish airliner and waited another hour before taking off. Then we passed over Denmark, Scotland, and a lot of ocean. Next, a fuel stop in Gander, Newfoundland, 6.5 hours later. 2.5 hours later, it was over. We were back in the United States. Each member of the TCU Jazz Ensemble knew this trip had been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And yet each realized, after visiting the Soviet Union and Poland, that as Dorothy had said in The Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home.